Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. This is episode number 87. I'm one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my co-host, Greg Zumach. Greg, we're back for the first time. We have not posted an episode for a full month because typically in the off season we're going every other week or so. But we took the last episode off, so now we're here for the first time in a month. It's kind of wild.
This is officially 2025. The future is here, and it's time to talk Cubs baseball for the current season now coming up.
Yeah, we can finally say last season, when we're rattling off stats and
Last
stuff
year,
from last season, it actually is last year, which that's always weird. Like November and December, it's yeah, it was last season,
right.
But it wasn't last year, so that sounds kind of weird. But today we're here to talk a little bit about just some stuff that's happened over the past month or so. Honestly, January is a pretty light month as far as prospect action goes, and so there's not a whole lot there. But what we will talk about today, we have seen a couple trades over the past month that included prospects, and then prospects going away from the Cubs. And then some different top 100 rankings have been posted. So we'll dig into Pipeline, The Athletic, and Baseball America. And then we will wrap up the show today by talking a little bit about prospect debuts in Chicago. Top prospects, just prospects in general, who we can expect to see in Chicago in this 2025 season. So it'll be a fun episode. And I think we should just go ahead and start off with some of the news that we saw most recently, right? This is the most recent news where the Cubs have, I think at this point, the Cubs have reportedly acquired Ryan Pressly from the Houston Astros, relief pitcher, and they traded away a prospect in return. That was Juan Bello, who was a prospect, a starting pitcher prospect, crafty righty, was kind of slated to start off the year in South Bend this year. Greg Zumach, what do you think about the trade and trading away Juan Bello for Ryan Pressly?
Bello was a ton of fun this year. I think for any Astros fans who happen to be tuning in here, he was a solid guy. He was somebody that we talked about on multiple episodes, is watching, really liking how he was able to take a really deep pitch mix, for that level. And also somebody that liked to mess with timing, somebody that had different looks. Honestly, he fit very well with a lot of the Astros Flyers pitchers. I mean, they very much have a certain style with regard to some of their top prospects, top pitchers, but they like to take different looks with some of their, lower swings. And Juan Bello was a really good selection. Now, the flip side of that, the people who are tuning in to talk about the Cubs, likely the majority of folks, is saying, Pressly's washed up. I don't agree with that. But also, we lose pitching depth. This could look like a bad deal in the future. And yes, I mean, anytime you're in a contention and you're moving prospects, it could look bad. But at the end of the day, if the Cubs are not able to develop the loss of Juan Bello,
yeah,
I mean, honestly, I think that's a bigger indictment on the entire organization. Pressly should provide enough value that it actually is more than what Bello projects at, and they're going to do it in the most important year for them.
Yeah, I loved watching Juan Bello this past season. He was super entertaining to watch. You mentioned how he mixed up his deliveries, very like Luis Devers from a few years ago, reminded me quite a bit of him. There was a lot to like about watching Juan Bello pitch. However, I had Juan Bello ranked as the 42nd best prospect in the Cubs system. The only reason why I know that is because I went however many deep on my offseason ranking. So I have him ranked 42nd. I've seen some places that said that he was in their top 30. And even if that was the case, maybe 28, 29, 30, this is not a guy that I think that we should be super concerned, because I think you nailed it, right? We're if the Cubs can't produce another Juan Bello, then there's something wrong with their development system in place. The way I described it on social media right after the trade was that if Juan Bello picks up a few extra ticks of miles per hour on his fastball, if he goes from sitting 89 to 91 to bumping up to 93 or 94, then he might be a guy a guy like a back end starter. If his stuff doesn't tick up, if the fastball velo doesn't tick up, then he's a guy that's going to struggle in the upper levels of the minors. He's going to struggle in AA and AAA. So, yeah, I mean, I really like Juan Bello in terms of watching him pitch, but in terms of his value, I love getting back Ryan Pressly for Juan Bello.
Yeah, and it there's just going to be some intangibles. This isn't a major league podcast, and so we don't need to dive too deep into it. But in many ways, this is the type of organization. This is the type of move in which some of the value of Presley isn't going to be quantifiable. At least in the way of like pulling up a fan graphs or baseball reference and saying he was worth X value. And so, the Cubs have to be willing to make these type of moves. And if they are going to be contending this year, they will make more of these moves. And the high likelihood is they will hurt more, especially if we start talking about deadline moves for relief pitchers or starting pitchers.
Yeah.
Oh man, that'll be pretty difficult. We are talking a much higher caliber of prospect, likely going back, and the Padres they gave up some pretty good prospects for 8 weeks of Tanner Scott.
Yeah.
And these things are going to be pricey. So
Mhm.
the Cubs got a pretty good value here. Juan Bello, I think, is not a nothing return,
Mhm.
but also something that, like if Horton, Birdsell, Noland, Will Sanders, Arian Rodriguez, who I think we're still really happy that the organization was able to keep in rather than getting plucked in the Rule 5. All of these guys, if they're not able to kind of outdevelop Juan Bello loss, we got some other issues.
If Juan Bello makes the major league roster in Houston, then you tip your cap to Houston and you
Yep.
tip your cap to Juan Bello and congratulate them on successful development. And
Yep.
you don't say, "Oh, the Cubs could have had that." So
Yes.
that's the way I ultimately look at it. The other trade that the Cubs completed recently, involving a prospect, was the trading of Michael Arias to the New York Yankees in exchange for cash. They needed to clear a spot on their 40-man roster to add Colin Ray to the roster, and Michael Arias was the guy that was kind of slid off the roster in order to make that a reality. Zumach, what's your thoughts on the Michael Arias trade, and I guess not only the Michael Arias trade, but everything leading up to Michael Arias being traded, him being added to the 40-man roster prior to last season, how he was handled this past season in terms of the conversion to the bullpen and kind of going up through the system pretty quickly, and then how that led to what we're looking at now.
It, I mean, I think this is probably one of the lower percentile outcomes that you would have imagined from the time that we finished up 2023. I had to do some quick math on that. Oh gosh. But the time we finished up 2023, which, Michael Arias was really exciting.
Yeah.
He was putting himself on the map to be a 40-man ad, which he ultimately was. And then if you were to ultimately reveal less than pretty much like 12 months later, 13, 14 months later, that he would just be DFA'd and traded for cash, I think you would really be like, that's a bad outcome.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think the Cubs, they this is baseball, so they went 1 out of 3 for their 40-man additions that year. It was Porter Hodge, Bailey Horn, Michael Arias. And Porter Hodge looks great, and that one looks awesome. Bailey Horn is not in the organization. Michael Arias is not in the organization. I don't know for sure, but it definitely felt like at the time that some of those 40-man additions were done with one team in mind, and that was the Boston Red Sox. Under Craig Breslow, who was the former director of pitching for the Cubs. And it seemed like those were 3 guys that it was very easy. You didn't need to squint to say, like, what, I bet those are some of Breslow's favorites. We don't want to just lose them. But ultimately, didn't really work out. To trade him for cash sucks. There's been some really good reporting out from Arizona Phil that said because of his contract structure, the Cubs had 0 leverage. This isn't like Jed Hoyer ruining things or making a bad deal. I got people that would send me angry messages, and it was like, I can't believe, like, they could have gotten more. They couldn't. Like,
Yeah. Well, because
I'm
it's
sure they
important.
didn't turn down a better deal.
Yeah, well, it's important to remember that Michael Arias was the Cubs were his second team that he'd been a part of. He was with the Toronto Blue Jays as a shortstop. released and then picked back up by the Cubs. And so because of that, his contract structure gets really weird because it is his second organization that he's been in. So
Yeah.
that's why there was essentially no leverage there. And I don't know, man. It was a weird year in 2024 for him
Yep.
because what he showed for a majority of the year wasn't all that different than what we saw in 2023. Honestly, like it was a lot of the same. The results obviously were not there nearly as much as they were in 2023, but like the Cubs decided to take a guy that was very clearly a relief pitcher, even though he'd been a starter in 2023. They added him to the 40-man roster, despite the fact that his best pitch was a changeup, and that does not always fit well in the bullpen. We've seen that not really work out, and he really couldn't find the zone in a way that we wanted him to a little bit more in 2024. Uh, he absolutely could pop. I mean, he's a guy that you can continue to hold out hope on. Then I'm sure the New York Yankees and their fans will as well. Just continue to hold out hope on a guy like Michael Arias. Like he could make it all click, and he could be a really good reliever in the major leagues, considering how athletic he is and how much he's still learning how to pitch and how electric the stuff is, despite his ability to command it in the zone. And so, yeah, if you're the Yankees, you're holding on to that hope and riding that out as long as you possibly can, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately these kind of moves happen every year, and sometimes these guys do click and they look bad in hindsight. Um, a lot of times they don't click. So it's just kind of one of those things where, the Blue Jays were looking terrible when they let Julian Merriweather go. Like that guy showcased premium stuff constantly. Just couldn't stay healthy. That was the reason they ultimately just let him go on waivers. And then he immediately popped for the Cubs. Jeremiah Estrada from the Cubs. There was maybe we don't have all the pieces to the puzzle there. I'll say that. But immediately popped with the Padres. That just honestly happens pretty often. And Michael Arias has the potential to be one of those guys.
All right, man. Let's transition away from trades. Let's get into some top 100 talk. I mean, because
Let's do
this
it.
is some prime top 100 season. I talked about how there's not a whole lot of prospect news. Well, this kind of is the news, right? This is the news as we were watching MLB Pipeline and The Athletic and Baseball America drop their top 100 rankings. I'll do some bad radio here and read off some of the rankings
Okay.
because it'll be important for some context here. Let's start off with Pipeline's
Okay.
rankings first. Let's do that first because they are seemingly highest on the Cubs farm system in terms of the number of prospects they have included in the top 100. That is 7 different Cubs made their way to the top 100. That starts off at the top with number 19, Matt Shaw, and then it drops down a little bit, and you have Cade Horton and Owen Caissie at 52 and 54. Moises Ballesteros has a nice ranking at number 69, and then James Triantos is at 73. Kevin Alcantara is at 90, and Jefferson Rojas sneaks into the top 100 at number 97. So I'll kick it to you first. What stands out to you on this ranking here? Anything?
Matt Shaw. I mean, the Cubs don't get top 20. It's been a while since they've had a true top 20 prospect. And there are degrees of magnitude for what a prospect is. Like it's not linear. It's not like, oh, a top 10 guy, a top 20 guy is, only slightly better than a top 40 guy. That's not true. They're substantially better. That doesn't mean that he's going to have a better career. It's just that what he projects at is really high. And it's been a consistent thing throughout the year that a lot of publications are very high on Matt Shaw. The Cubs are very high on Matt Shaw. Outside of something really crazy happening in the next few weeks, Matt Shaw looks like he's going to be making an impact. Honestly, even if crazy stuff happens over the next few weeks, I think Matt Shaw has still set himself up. Top 20 guy pretty consistently or, right around there. He looks good. This is one of the publications that's highest on Triantos.
Yeah.
Definitely a Jim Callis
Jim Callis
guy
loves
all
him
through
some
and
James
through.
Triantos. Yep.
Yep. Not every team's going to love Triantos, but for the teams that will, I think they're going to really love what he brings. Hasn't shown a lot of power. Important to remember that he would have been draft eligible this year. And so in a
Had he gone to
year where,
college?
had you gone to college? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So had you gone to college to UNC, which the Cubs had to buy him out with a $2.1 million signing bonus, he would have been draft eligible this year. So it's really interesting to guess kind of what he is. Instead, he was hitting fairly well in AAA by the end of the year. So
Mhm.
ultimately, that's a pretty good outcome. Hasn't shown a lot of power yet. But yeah, Callis definitely is a huge fan of Triantos. And he's going to make for some very interesting discussion going forward. I guess one thing that I want to kick to you a little bit, which is Kevin Alcantara is a weird one, right?
Yeah.
Like he looks like he has otherworld talent, and then he has actually produced pretty consistently, like
Yeah.
actually insanely consistently, right? Like it's 123, 124 WRC plus like every year.
Yeah.
This is a guy that shows some really crazy potential and is producing. And I know he's not a perfect product, but like honestly, I'm a little surprised that publications, especially that lean into tools, don't have him much higher.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with Pipeline having him at number 90, that's especially interesting. I think that, like, with a guy like Kevin Alcantara, you'd think that you'd see him more in, like, maybe not 50, and he doesn't need to be that high, but, like, a little bit high. If you're gonna include him, like, you believe in the tools, you believe in the
Yeah.
production, and so, like, raise him up here a little bit more.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, yeah, I don't know. He is an interesting case. I think that for me, part of the thing that always makes me stop and pause with Kevin Alcantara is his option situation and how he has he's already on the 40-man roster, so he has fewer options. And then also the fact that he has to play his way into a starting role in a tough outfield in Chicago. And so, like, to me, it is that's very small. Like, for a guy to earn a starting role, he's gonna have to take it and run with it. And we've seen Kevin Alcantara go on his hot streaks. We've also seen him go on his cold streaks for a month at a time. And so, like, he can't be hitting one of those cold streaks if he's given the starting job at any point during the season in Chicago. And so, like, I think that gets a little tricky because at that point, then he's a major league. He's a guy who has performed well in the minors, but not at an astronomical level. Like, you're right. He's putting up like 123, 124 WRC plus. He's not putting up a 140 WRC plus in the minors. And so if he goes up to Chicago, if he's given a starting role and he produces like a 70 WRC plus for a month, well, then how do you value him? Like, how do the Cubs value him? How does another team value him? If the Cubs were to then turn around and trade him, what could they get back in return? It just gets really dicey, like really fast with Kevin Alcantara. From a production and talent standpoint, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, like, there's every reason for him to be higher than number 90 on one of these rankings. But it gets tricky because of all the other things that don't include production and talent, which he has both of those things. So he's kind of an interesting case. I want to turn the attention here real quick to Jefferson Rojas because I think it's fun that that Jim Callis and Jonathan Mayo have continued to include Jefferson Rojas on their top 100 rankings at number 97 here because really what that's doing is saying that they still believe in him despite some poor numbers that were put up last year, believing that he might have hit into some bad luck during his time in South Bend in 2024. I love it. I think that it's great. I believe that Pipeline is the only place that he still shows up on a top one. I mean, I know compared to the Athletic and Baseball America, this is the only place he is. But I think even like Just Baseball, like Aaron Layton used to be pretty high on him. I think that he's felt the need to drop him, which, like, I get it, right? Like, I get dropping outside of a top 100, but I love that Rojas is still here at and gives the Cubs 7 guys in the top 100.
Yeah, Rojas is easily the player that if you just said, "Hey, pick somebody who just pops next year." Honestly, I think Rojas is like my easy answer. I could go like a deeper guess, of course, but Rojas looked really, really good in 2023. 2024 dealt with being at an advanced level. The body maybe wasn't ready for a full rigor of a full season. I'm not saying he didn't prepare, of course. Just it's physically insanely demanding to actually get out there and do it. And he's playing against guys that are 23, 24 years old sometimes in high A. It wasn't just the cold. That is something that gets brought up a lot with the Latin players in the Midwest League earlier in the year. I don't think it was just the cold. I think it was just a really hard assignment.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, you get a little bit of growth with the body. You get him in a good spot this season. I think he really pops.
I was gonna say, what's your thought on his assignment to lead off the season? Do you think he'll be back in South Bend? Do you think he'll be up in Double A Knoxville?
Yeah, that's fascinating because honestly, I go back and forth on it.
Same.
It in some ways, it's like, you know what? If you feel good that he's done the work behind the scenes, and the reports, by the way, are really strong. People love Jefferson Rojas for what he's done behind the scenes, at least from what I've heard. I don't know if you've heard that. I know Todd said that before. People really respect the work ethic. This is not a kid who's like goofing around or whatever. He's putting in the work.
There's a reason why he got significant playing time in Major League Spring Training last year.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. There's also, I think we've talked about this before. He could have gone to Double A to start last year. Like that was a legitimate discussion that we heard behind the scenes, and ultimately probably better that he didn't do that. I am leaning towards Double A, also because I think Ben Cowles finds himself in Triple A, and I'm trying to really think about where Jefferson like. I don't think he's really going to be taking too much playing time away from a bigger prospect. Not that they don't have a shortstop, but with Ben Cowles moving up to AAA, hopefully with a healthy season, it's a little warmer in Tennessee at the time.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
might honestly just start him in AA.
That's a good point. I mean, because right now, like if Jefferson Rojas is not in Knoxville to start off the
Right.
year, then you've got Ed Howard as your starting
Yeah.
shortstop. I mean, I'm kind of looking through the roster here.
Maybe
Like,
Christian. Like maybe if Christian's looking really good,
yeah.
um,
But regardless, you still got
yeah,
a reach.
you're gonna
Not a
need
reach,
more.
but yeah, you've got a guy that may not fit in super
Yeah.
smoothly in Double A. So,
Right.
that is one of my most interesting things to watch in terms of assignments this year. Maybe the single most interesting one to watch going into 2025 is the Jefferson Rojas assignment, like more than any
Yeah.
other pitcher
I
or
think
any
I'm
other
I'm
player.
with you on that one. Yep.
All right, let's do Baseball America next.
Yep.
They included 5 players on their top 100. That was Matt Shaw at 35, which was down a few ticks compared to the other publications. Cade Horton at 54, which is similar to Pipeline, who had him at 52. Moises Ballesteros, similar again at number 62. Owen Caissie at 64, and then Kevin Alcantara at 71. So up a little bit higher for Kevin Alcantara there. How have you felt about Moises Ballesteros being in the 60s here? Where's your take on that?
So it's fine. I guess he's the guy that I still think is a very special bat.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to need to be. And we've had some really good discussions. It was you, me, and Brian offline and online talking about that. The path for him to be actually a true catcher is probably pretty difficult. Now, Alex Cohen and others were talking about how he looked much slimmer this offseason. It's best shape of his life season right now. So, who knows? Maybe he really, really does pop as a catcher. I think he's got an uphill battle to climb there regardless. And so if you're looking at a guy that is DH, bit of first base, maybe he catches 15 games a year.
Mm-hmm.
Late inning sub, something like that, no blowout, like whatever. Get your catchers off their feet. He's gonna need to mash.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a 60 overall, in the top 100 is a pretty strong statement to make for a guy that projects like that.
I kind of love it. I love him being ranked in the 60s. And my thinking with that is that if he comes out in 2025 and proves that he can catch a little bit and hits pretty well, then you can fly him up prospect rankings up into the top 20s, right? If he maybe doesn't catch super well, but he hits like 350 with 20 home runs in the first half, then you can fly him back up those rankings. Like he's in a good spot where you can kind of just shoot him up rankings one way, or if he comes out, it's like, hey, like he's not a catcher anymore, and you don't feel confident that like you're not sure about what he can do defensively, then you can kind of just pop him down a little bit and say like, oh, well, he's hit up to this point, he's hit really well up to this point, like he's still in the 90s or whatever. And so like if I'm Pipeline and if I'm Baseball America and I'm hedging my bets either way, like the 60s is kind of perfect for Moises Ballesteros. They kind of nailed it. That they can go in either direction without much without us really batting an eye. I think in either direction, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, totally fair ranking. Easy to make a claim one way or the other. He's on a top 100 list pretty consistently. So
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, like you said, pretty well nailed that one.
All right, we will end with The Athletic, who only included Keith Law only included
Yeah.
4 Cubs prospects in his top 100. Those guys were Matt Shaw, who he ranked at number 14, so the highest we've seen Matt Shaw.
Yeah, he's
I mean,
big Matt Shaw fan. He
yeah,
has been since the draft. Yeah.
big Matt Shaw guy, pushing top 10 in all of baseball. Kevin
Mhm.
Alcantara, who is also the highest at number 33,
Yep.
way higher than everybody else. Moises Ballesteros, who's 46, a decent amount higher than everybody else, and then
Yep.
Cade Horton at number 74. So what you got here, you've got the 3 guys up top he is much higher on than everybody else. You got Cade Horton where he's lower on than most other publications, and then you're absent James Triantos, which is fine, Jefferson Rojas, which is more than fine,
Yeah.
and then Owen Caissie, which is wild. Like wild that you don't include Owen Caissie.
Yeah, Keith just hasn't liked Owen Caissie for a while. I mean, we just all have our things and evaluations. So
Mm-hmm.
if he just doesn't I'm not saying he doesn't like him personally. He just maybe just got a bad report on him, just
Yeah.
has watched him, just hasn't liked what he's seen. I disagree on it, but yeah, that one people were up in arms about it, and it's kind of like, yeah, that's exactly what I expected. I don't know.
Yeah.
In some defense, which I don't agree with it, but Caissie didn't dominate AAA.
Yeah.
So if you're not as a big a believer in the defensive improvements that I think he made, I think you've said he's made in the corner outfield, and you're not seeing him mash,
Mm-hmm.
I don't get the platoon stuff. I feel like that gets brought up a lot. I don't remember. Well, we wouldn't have a report from Keith on this one, but I feel like he's brought up platoon concerns on that one before. I don't agree with that. Caissie's improved a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Hit really well. I think he's got a 340 or a 360 WOBA against left-handed pitching on tracked pitches over the last few years. So, I disagree with it. I'm not surprised. I love seeing Kevin Alcantara ranked that high. I think it's justifiable for somebody to do it.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I think it's interesting. I mean, we can look at him not ranking Owen Caissie and complain and all that good stuff, and it's fair, right? It's fair to complain. It's fair to not rank him top 100.
Yeah.
It's fair on both ways. But if we're complaining about Owen Caissie, we also have to point to the fact that he's high on Shaw, he's high on Kevin Alcantara, he's high on Moises Ballesteros, he's high on those 3 guys, and so there are fewer Cubs on his top 100 than what we see in Pipeline. But again, the James Triantos and Jefferson Rojas, you're kind of like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Well, I'm not too upset about that. And then it's really just Owen Caissie, but the not including Owen Caissie is kind of offset by these other guys. Matt Shaw at number 14 is wild. That's a number that we have not seen in years and years. I know that
Right.
at one point Pete Crow Armstrong got into the top 20 mid-season. I think it was during some promotions. I think that it might not have had the draft picks folded into the top 100 yet. But PCA was top 20 at one point, but he was not top 20 to end season or to begin the season. But besides him, we haven't really seen a whole lot of top 20 prospects in baseball in a long time. So to see Matt Shaw at 14 is just so damn fun. I love it.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic. If I want to quibble on anything, whether you like Owen Caissie or not, I have a pretty hard time justifying ranking Drew Jones. I almost said it wrong. As high as he did. When Drew Jones was 21 years old, he was repeating single A. He finally had. Some people don't like to use WRC plus for these levels, but he finally had a WRC plus of over 100, so it's 125. As a 21-year-old in single A, whereas Owen Caissie was 22 in AAA, same kind of level of performance. Yeah, again, these are apples, oranges, or whatever.
Well, but honestly, if you want to go something closer to each other, I love Kevin Alcantara. I've been one of the high guys on Kevin Alcantara for a while, but to have Kevin Alcantara at 33 and Owen Caissie not ranked, that I don't really get. It might come down to the defense.
I think
I
it's the
think that
defense.
it comes down to Kevin Alcantara playing strong defense in center field,
Yeah.
and Owen Caissie being potentially average in left or right field. But is that enough for 60 slots, 70 slots? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some people disagree on it. Like if you look at the projection of what I did this a while ago, but if you look at the projection of a median center fielder in
Mhm.
Major League Baseball versus a median, I think it was right fielder is what I looked at. Oh man, it's just so different. Like,
Yeah.
so I can understand if you are a huge believer in just shortstops, center fielders, and true catchers, and that's your list. Is basically like these are the guys, right? You have to either be one of those guys or just mash the crap out of the ball if you're a hitter. I get it, but again, I disagree. I think that I do think that things are skewed a little bit too much. But that's his rankings. I don't get too up in arms about it.
The rankings are fun. They're fun to look at every year, and honestly, like they're
Yeah.
fun when you, especially when you're diving into the Cubs system as much as we are, to really get something to compare the Cubs system to other organizations and Cubs prospects to prospects in other organizations. So
Yep.
always fun. Let's transition to kind of our last couple items here that we're talking about today. One is let's go under the impression that Matt Shaw is the starting third baseman for the Cubs on opening day. Because as of right now, we're sitting here on recording this on January 27th. We have no reason to believe otherwise because the Cubs don't have another third baseman besides Matt Shaw. And so let's assume that he is a starting third baseman on opening day. The Cubs have 4 other top 100 prospects that we were just talking about that are going to likely start off the year in AAA Iowa. You got Cade Horton on the pitching side of things, and then you have 3 bats in Moises Ballesteros, Owen Caissie, and James Triantos. I want to talk to you a little bit about who we expect to debut first. And honestly, it may be best just to kind of go through each of these guys and think about when they could debut overall, and then we can kind of use that to determine who might be first here. I honestly, it might be smart to just start off with the one guy who's a pitcher, right? Let's just start off with Cade Horton and our
Cade.
expectations with him because that's going to be an easy conversation to have, right? So, Cade Horton, man, it's going to be an interesting case with him in 2025. Obviously, coming off injury in 2024, where he did not throw that many innings. I believe he was right around 38 innings. Is that what he was?
Yes.
Between
Yeah.
AA and AAA last year. This time last year, you and I and Brian and pretty much anyone who follows prospects expected Cade Horton to be up in Chicago by mid-season last year. Obviously,
Yeah.
that didn't happen because of the injuries. What are your thoughts on Cade Horton and when he may debut in Chicago this year?
If he's healthy, I think he's up early. There's 2 things to look for. 1 is health, and 2 is his fastball movement. Cubs folks weren't and it might have been injury related. They didn't love that Cade Horton's fastball started to add a lot of cut to it. Now the Cubs like these little cutty 4-seamers. That's what they call them, cutty 4s, or relative cut. They don't operate like true cutters. Cutter technically means that it moves like, if you're a right-handed pitcher throwing a cutter, by definition, it moves away from a right-handed batter, cuts away from a right-handed batter, whereas sinkers usually run into a right-handed batter. That's kind of how to explain it there. The average 4-seam fastball in Major League Baseball from a right-hander actually runs into a right-handed batter about 7 inches. Like that's a straight fastball is one that effectively runs into a right-handed batter from a right-handed pitcher. Cade Horton and Justin Steele is a big example. Porter Hodge are probably some of the bigger ones where they actually throw a ball that technically does go straight, but it gives a little bit of an illusion. It looks like it's cutting because it's set about 6 or 7 inches difference from what a fastball normally looks like from somebody throwing it. And while that can be beneficial, and there's some data on that, the Cubs folks were actually a little bit disappointed that Cade's shape changed so much. They didn't want him to be that extreme. lost some of the good vertical movement on it and had too much horizontal movement. That's going to be one of the biggest things to watch. He should be in AAA. We should have the data on that. So we should be able to see what that's looking like. And then the biggest thing is health.
Yeah.
I think he's up by May, to be honest. I think he if he's healthy, I think he's up early, and I don't really care what role.
Yeah.
And probably only getting aggressively 67 innings next year. So I don't think I waste any of those bullets. If he's looking good, he's up.
Yeah, I could potentially see him getting a few more innings than that. If he
I
can
think that's
push
fair.
up to 80. He's not going to exceed 100 innings. And so his use in the rotation, whether that's in Chicago or in Iowa, might not make a ton of sense. It might make more sense to be as a multi-inning reliever. Maybe he starts off in the rotation in Iowa, and then when he gets called up to Chicago, it's as a reliever. It'll just be when he's looking comfortable is when he'll get called up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, he's kind of the wild card in this exercise, right? Where we could see him in May, we could see him in August or September, and I think that
Yeah. So let me throw a question, a variable to you. Even with good health,
mm-hmm.
do you think he actually starts in Iowa within the first week? I'm not saying starting pitcher. I'm saying break camp with the Iowa Cubs.
I don't think he will be in Des Moines on opening day.
I don't either. I think they're going to hold him back a little bit, actually.
Yeah. So that say they hold him back and they have him get innings in whatever way they can control the situation a little bit more back in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
The longer they keep him, the longer they keep him there, the longer we're gonna have to wait for him to make it up to Chicago. Is the way that I interpret.
Yep.
Because I do think he does get innings in Iowa. Like, I don't think he's gonna go be held back in Arizona until he's ready and get called up to Chicago. So he's the wild card. I think for my prediction of him, I'm gonna have to come back. I think that his situation is just so different. Let's go to Moises Ballesteros. I guess my question, as we're kind of feeling this out, is like, under what circumstance, like what will warrant a Moises Ballesteros promotion up to Chicago this year?
He would have to go on one hell of a heater. I really think it's a big heater, or the defense has looked much better to the point that he is at least a viable third catcher. And I think there's just, in a critical season like this, it's not without precedent. The Cubs did this with Wilson Contreras in 2016. But I would say that there's a lot stacked against this for 2025.
I don't see Moises being called up as the backup catcher. If one of them gets injured, if Miguel Amaya or Carson Kelly gets injured, I don't think Moises Ballesteros gets called up as the backup. I think
that's totally fair. Yeah,
it's Carlos Perez. It would be Pablo Aliendo before it'd be Moises Ballesteros, in my opinion.
Probably even somebody outside the organization.
I think that's more likely than Pablo, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, it's gonna have to be him hitting the cover off the ball, and because of that, I don't think it's him hitting the cover off the ball for 2 weeks or a month. I think it's gonna have to be the first half of the season. He just tore it up to the point where it's like, we can't keep him down here anymore. I think we're looking at like an August timeline or so for Moises Ballesteros for me.
Or, I mean, truly, like, he may mash, look decent at catcher, and they may call him up in September. Because if he looks somewhat viable as a catcher, that's the only time that having a third catcher probably makes sense.
Yeah.
But and even then, so he'll be Rule 5 draft eligible next December. That doesn't mean that they're going to call him up. They didn't do that with Owen Caissie this year, and I mean, I disagreed with that, but whatever. And so, they don't even necessarily need to call him up this year. Yeah, I think if anything, it's much later in the summer.
What do you think is more likely? He's up in like May, or he doesn't come up this year?
Doesn't come up this year. If I had to pick May or that, I would say it doesn't come up this year.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Owen Caissie. For me, the situation with him is the injuries have to shake out right, that he gets full, like he'll get a lot of playing time. in left or right field in Chicago. Right? It is Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki. Ian Happ being out for a while, Seiya Suzuki being banged up, whether he goes on the IL or not. And then there's your own Caissie. I think that Kevin Alcantara throws a wrinkle into this. Alexander Canario throws a wrinkle into this. I think that a lot of injuries are going to have to happen for Owen Caissie to get the call up to Chicago this year. So that makes it hard to predict when it might actually happen. Again, I think it's very likely that he spends the entire year in AAA Iowa for Owen Caissie.
Yeah. Let me pull up the Cubs schedule here really quick. I'm going to make a prediction if I can find it.
I love it.
Yeah. This is going to be a big oh, come on. There's no way that this. All right.
Is he he make his
n-
debut in Canada?
So that one would have been fun. That was another thing I was going to toy around with. Let me toss out a different prediction for you.
Okay.
He does not get called up to the Cubs at all.
Okay.
Because he will be traded by the time the season starts.
Yeah.
And this like inside information, I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna break or whatever. I think that it wouldn't shock me if the Cubs decide this is a time to push chips in. Caissie has a profile that some teams would definitely be like, yeah, we'd throw him in left field right now. Some of those teams could also use cheap outfielder in exchange for pitching, let's say. It would not shock me for Owen Caissie. If Owen Caissie stays in the organization, I'm going to say that there's an injury in like June. Yeah. I think he's an easy guy you bring up for a couple weeks.
I agree with that completely. James Triantos, how does he come up? How does he debut in Chicago this year?
That's a really, really, really good question. Also a guy that needs to be added to the Rule 5 at the end of next year. I think his path is actually a little bit easier. And I think it could be as simple as the defense actually keeps improving. Baseball America seemed to be pretty big fans of it, which was really nice to see. You know, I love Nico, but he occasionally will just miss a couple weeks for stuff. If Triantos is hitting well, that's kind of an easy guy to just sub in for him. Yeah. Leave Shaw at third. Everybody else stays in the infield. Triantos is a similar profile. No, you're not going to hit him at the top of the lineup, but just let him try to, get on base using contacts, down in the lineup. I think it's just kind of a Nico injury.
Yeah.
To be honest.
So we got Triantos, who's more than likely injury related.
Yep.
Owen Caissie, more than likely injury related. Moises Ballesteros, who is you gotta mash, and then Cade Horton, who is whenever he's ready, is kind of the deal. So of those four guys, who makes their debut first in 2025?
I went into this thinking Cade. I'm just gonna say Cade.
Yeah, I think it's Cade. I think it's Cade too. I'm gonna go with Cade, but I got burned on that a little bit last year for different reasons. So let's go with Cade. Be optimistic about what this year's gonna look like. All right, man. Let's in addition to those guys, or maybe not even necessarily in addition to those guys, if we don't think that some of those guys are going to debut, we did this exercise last year. I don't know if it was me and you or me and Brian. I think it was me and you.
We did it last year, yeah. Actually, I think the three of us did.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I think you're right. So we did an exercise, and we're going to do it now, where it is how many prospects and who, but how many prospects will make their major league debut with the Chicago Cubs this year. So a little bit of background, a little bit of context. In 2023, not this past year, but 2023, the first year the Cubs were kind of like seemingly competing for a division. In 2023, they had 7 guys make their MLB debut. Not necessarily top prospects, just guys in general. They had 7 guys make their debut. Last year in 2024, it was 6. So 7 and 6. That's generally the number we're probably shooting for here. Obviously, the system changes from year to year. Last year, the Cubs, the 6 players that did debut were Kevin Alcantara, Luis Vasquez, which it felt like he debuted in 2023, but it was indeed last year.
Okay. Wow.
Porter Hodge, obviously. Ben Brown made his debut early in the season last year. Jack Neely actually made his MLB debut after the trade, so we couldn't have predicted him before the season. And Hunter Biggie, who made his debut before getting traded away. So the Cubs had 6 debuts last year in 2024. I guess you want me to lead off with some names I'm
Yeah,
going to throw out
yeah,
there?
let's do it. Let's do it.
So I'll start off with some of the hitters because I think those might be more straightforward in terms of and it plays off what we were just talking about. So Matt Shaw is a given. We both say Matt Shaw will be will be debuting in 2025, likely on opening day.
Yep.
I'm actually going to pass on James Triantos. I don't think James Triantos makes his debut this year. I'm going to pass on
Yeah.
him, but I will go with Moises Ballesteros and Owen Caissie. I think that
Okay.
Moises will hit enough that it's going to justify, like, he's going to have to debut in some way, shape, or form if he continues to hit the cover off the ball in AAA. So I'll go with Moises. I will go with Owen Caissie. I think there'll be enough injuries for him to get a little bit of run in the major leagues. So I'll go with those three big bats. And then I've got one more non-top top prospect bat. I'm going to go with Ben Cowles
Oh
because
man, that's who I was gonna
yeah,
say.
I think if I'm not going with James Triantos, then I
Yeah.
think I have to go with Ben Cowles, right? Where like it's an infielder who can play multiple positions, like right. Ben Cowles can play second,
Yep.
third, and short. Can probably play some outfield if you need him to as well. Already on the 40-man roster. The Cubs have just a ton of these guys. I mean, we've talked about them quite a bit with how many guys that have the similar profile to Ben Cowles, and the Cubs also have Gage Workman, which we'll exclude Gage Workman from this exercise. If he's still on the team, he will debut, obviously, but
Hmm.
um, I'll go with Ben Cowles. So those are my 4 bats that I'm going to go with here. I'm actually going to have 8 total guys here
Okay.
debuting, but those are the 4 bats. Do you have any other thoughts on bats?
On bats, it's probably not impossible that Johnny Long could come up for a short amount of time. So the thinking there is, let's say there's I mean, I hate to say that we keep bringing up injuries, but the amount of depth for first baseman really isn't great.
Good point.
And yes, I think the Cubs would prefer to go outside the organization if there's a significant injury to Bush.
Yeah.
But if he like rolls an ankle and he's out for a couple weeks and Johnny Long's hitting well in AAA, honestly, probably not the craziest thing to just toss him up there instead of putting in John Birdie.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I'm not going to go with him, but like that's at least a plausible thing. Christian Franklin is another guy that wouldn't. It would be a lot because he'd have to really, really jump like Kevin Alcantara, Owen Caissie. Not impossible, but unlikely.
I think he makes sense if the Cubs are not going to give a starting spot for an extended period of time. I think you want to give a starting spot to Kevin
Right.
Alcantara or a starting spot to Owen Caissie. With Christian Franklin, you may be okay with calling him up and having him come off the bench and making one start a week for a few weeks. So
Yep. Or
that may
just
be
hit
the reason why.
lefties, or
Exactly.
something like that. So,
Yeah. So who are your picks for bats then?
um, sorry, I was just getting something. I'm not sure that anything's gonna break, but it. So who are my picks for bats? So Matt Shaw, that guy, I think he's gonna
He's
do
good
it.
at baseball.
I think he's gonna do it. Ben Cowles is the other one.
Okay.
Um, let me see who else here. Admittedly, most of my list is pitchers, so
Fair.
that's kind of what I've been going through. Um,
Do you think anyone from the trio of James Triantos, Owen Caissie, and Moises Ballesteros?
yeah, I do. I think one out of the three at least, and I personally would prefer to see Triantos up instead of Cowles. That's not a knock on Cowles. Um, but I don't want to predict a Nico injury. So like if you just and they seem very high on Cowles. When I published my list, I kicked it around my top prospect list for the Cubs. I kicked it around to a couple folks, and I had some people on the inside who were like, dude, you definitely forgot Ben Cowles. And I was like, crap. Yeah, I did. It wasn't an intentional oversight. So I think they really do like Ben Cowles. I mean, I predicted Caissie would get traded, so that's the only reason I'm not picking him.
Yeah.
And Kevin Alcantara would be my fill-in guy, but he already made his debut, so I'm
Yeah.
not going to count him. So yeah, I'll say like Ballesteros makes it
Yeah.
up. I would love for Triantos. That would be my preferred. I will just, in the spirit of trying to predict what actually happens. You know what? Shoot. No, I'm gonna go for this. Is fun for me. I'm gonna pick Triantos makes his debut this year.
I love it. All right, the pitchers are more interesting because I think in
Yes.
past years you kind of point to the pitchers and say, oh, there's a better path for a lot of pitchers
Yep.
because clubs go through pitchers so much. But really, right now the Cubs have a lot of depth in terms of like, is this guy a starting pitcher? Is he a relief pitcher? You've got like 8 different pitchers that you can consider a starting pitcher in the organization. And so like
Yeah.
that gets a little tricky there. I've got two names of guys that are easy picks for me, and that's Cade Horton, who we've already talked about, obviously. And then the other, I've got to go with a lefty reliever. Like I'm looking through
Okay.
lefty relievers because I feel like that's always I guess that didn't happen last year in 2024, but going with a lefty reliever is always a pretty safe bet. The Cubs don't have a lot of them. The Cubs have Riley Martin. I know the Cubs did not add
Yep.
Riley Martin to their 40-man roster this past offseason, but just because the Cubs didn't add him this offseason does not mean he does not make his debut in Chicago this year. So my two for sure pitchers are Cade Horton and Riley Martin. And then I've got 2 other slots. So I'm going to go with 8, like I said, 8 total
Yep.
debuts. The 2 more slots that are battles between 2 pitchers. So I've got one, which is Brandon Birdsell or Connor Noland. I think that I'm going to give 1 slot to each of those. If I'm betting, I'm leaning more towards Brandon Birdsell because I think he's a more major league stuff ready. Like we're going to have to see Connor Noland break out a little bit more. And so I'm going to go with Brandon Birdsell or Connor Noland. And then the other slot is kind of a little bit of a deeper cut. I'm going to go with either Antonio Santos or Cole Franklin. Give me one of those 2 guys that are back on minor league deals. Give me either Cole Franklin or Antonio Santos making their debut in Chicago this year.
Yeah, I love that last one. I think that is it's guys that I thought about earlier. Give me a Cole Franklin debut and I'll be very happy. Not a thing that I thought I would say when I started kind of really, really following writing about stuff in 2021, or late 2020, that like we would finally in 2025 be hoping that Cole would get it, the final call up. But no, I think those are some really good names. I'm going.
I will say
ahead.
real quick that Antonio Santos would not be making his MLB debut because he did debut in 2020, 2021
Yeah, it's a
with
while
the
ago.
Rockies. So
Yep.
if we're really going MLB debuts, I'll go with Cole Franklin. But I think that one of those 2 guys. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so I'm actually going to go Horton, Birdsell, and Noland. And the reason for that is Noland and Birdsell both need to make their they need to be added to the Rule 5 by the end of the year. Noland, some folks really like him as a prospect. Fangraphs definitely does. He fits the mold of somebody that if there's a doubleheader, he's an easy guy to bring up to, if he's pitching on a normal rotation, to just slide him up, try to get through 3 or 4 innings with him, go to the pen. Birdsell, kind of that same idea, with also the benefit of I think he would play up a little bit more in the pen as well if need be. So, and then Horton's Horton. I was going to go with Horton, Birdsell, Noland, and Riley Martin.
I love it. I mean, I think that we're on the same page. I think that this is getting kind of interesting up in the upper levels of the minors right now because all those guys will likely, everybody that we mentioned will likely debut in Iowa this season, except for Matt Shaw, obviously. But there's none of those guys that will be in Knoxville to start off the year. Right. And I think there's probably a pretty damn good chance that the Cubs have somebody make their way all the way up from AA to the majors. We've seen that obviously in past years. So we did not include one of those names that are likely to start off the year in AA, but kind of keep those guys in mind as well. So, all right, man, that's all I've got for today's episode. Am I missing anything here?
Nope, I don't think so. Things to watch in the next few weeks. Pitchers and catchers are going to be reporting. We're going to get a ton of pictures. If you don't follow Rich Biesterfeld on Twitter, X, whatever, you definitely should. He does just some amazing work down in Arizona. He's got videos, he's got pictures down there. Follow him all year round. He's fantastic. We're going to be seeing guys who's in the best shape of their life, who's going to be, like Jordan Wicks is looking tight. I'm very excited for that. Hoping the oblique is feeling good. And then, this is kind of it. This is a pretty critical season. So I think the Cubs are going to push some buttons here, pull some levers, whatever metaphor you want to use. A lot's riding on this. So I think it's going to be a big year where they kind of can't get off to a slow start. We might see a pretty aggressive team.
I believe that our next episode will be our fantasy draft that we do every year. I believe that's our next episode. And then in the month of March, late February, early March, I think is what we'll do. We'll do our season previews of each of the 4 Cubs minor league affiliates. So we've got some good stuff coming up. If you guys are super nerds like we are, then you'll really enjoy the fantasy draft. That's maybe my favorite episode every single year. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. But we've got some good stuff coming up here on Cubs on Deck. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in, even though we were gone for the month of January up to this point. We really appreciate you guys sticking around, and we'll be back in your ears in 2 short weeks. Thanks, guys.